Playing on a Budget is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com, the best Magic the Gathering singles and sealed retailer on the internet, GatheringMagic.com, your #1 source for Magic the Gathering news and content, and RogueDeckBuilder.com, my personal channel filled with innovative and entertaining Magic the Gathering rogue brews. Hi there, it's Kevin with GatheringMagic.com here with another episode of Playing on a Budget. This week we're actually going to take a user-submitted deck and turn it into a budget deck. I've had a lot of success with the deck in front of you. This is a Bant Enchantments deck that uses Thopter Spy Network and Helm of the Gods as a combo to take over a lot of games, and then all the enchantments basically, Silkwrap, Suspension Fields, Stasis Snares, etc., to control the board until that you get a Thopter Spy Network out, or From Beyond, or Sigil the Empty Throne. And just through the sheer card advantage you're going to get through Thopter Spy Network and the tokens that it generates, and the pressure that the Helm of the Gods can easily pressure your opponent, this deck has done quite well for me in Standard. Currently I'm 7-0. I played this on my Twitch stream on Tuesday. I made some additions and subtractions to the deck, kind of tweaked around with the deck list a little bit. And I'm 7-0 on MTG. Only, I believe, losing one game is all out of that 7-0 run. So it's incredibly powerful deck. A lot of them were nail biters, like down to very few life by the time I stabilized and won the game. So I really am trying to put this into a budget, because the good news is, like, the core of the deck, which is the enchantments, are all very, very much budget, especially the win condition with Sigil of the Empty Throne. So, of course, this one in front of you is not a budget because it runs so many fetch lands. The Windswept Heaths, the Flooded Strands, the Polluted Deltas, etc., etc., and even Hangerback Walkers in this deck. It is absolutely not anywhere near budget. But we'll probably try to play this as the upgraded version to the budget. I think we're going to call it like the Rogues Alley, which is going to be a Sunday series that we're going to do for Gathering Magic, where I do not have budgetary constraints and can just go wild with Rogue Brews. But since this is playing on a budget, I'm going to take you over to the budget deck. So here is the budget deck. Before we get over into the deck tech, we'll bring up the prices, brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com. So this one's going to cost around $84. And the majority of the deck, the price is going to be through the Shambling Vents, which I think are very, very good in the deck, but you don't have to run them. We're still basically messing around with the mana base. We do have a ton of comes into play tap lands, so I might actually cut down some of the Scoured Barrens or the Shambling Vents. Probably more likely the Shambling Vent or the Scoured Barrens, because the Shambling Vents are just very, very lethal in this deck. And as you can see, everything else is between $50, $1, 25 cents. Just insanely budget to run this deck right now. So anywho, let's go back over the deck tech. We have, see if we can sort this by converted mana cost. So at our 1-drop slot, we're only going to run one Helm of the Gods, because the whole reason for Helm of the Gods in the other list was it comboed very well with Thopter Spy Network. If you had the Helm of the Gods, it's going to guarantee you a Thopter with the Thopter Spy Network, and then you can equip the Thopter with the Helm of the Gods and at least have a 2/2 flyer. And what I like about Helm of the Gods is it is a very low casting cost and a very low equip cost. And in a deck that runs a ton of enchantments, this Helm of the Gods is going to get out of hand very quickly. I mean, anything you put it on, like the Shambling Vent is going to be huge, the Blood Cursed Knight is going to be huge, or the Mithralized activation is going to be probably like a 2-turn clock, or maybe even lethal on just one swing. So for control, what we're running in this is we are going to run 4 Silkwraps and 4 Suspension Fields. So these basically have all of your bases covered. Silkwrap exiles a creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. It's a very good card for it. This card it was one of the most played cards at Pro Tour Battle for Zendikar, because it does a great job of getting rid of the Hangerback Walkers. And what's really cool about the Silkwrap is if then they destroy Silkwrap and their Hangerback Walker returns to the battlefield, it returns as 0/0 and just dies. So Silkwrap has been the answer for the annoying robot. Suspension Field can also take back a Hangerback Walker on 3. And it also is very good against Tassigurs, Mantis Riders. This deck is insanely good against Mantis Riders because both Silkwrap and Suspension Field hit it. So Suspension Field is a little bit weaker than Silkwrap because the format is very aggressive with a Tarka Landfall and Jace. The Silkwrap can almost get rid of every card in the game, but Suspension Field gives you the other cards that the Silkwrap doesn't quite take care of. Then we have Stasis Snare, which is, this card is, if you haven't tested out Stasis Snare, I highly encourage it. It's a flash way to get rid of a creature. So, and it doesn't have any requirements like Suspension Field and Silkwrap. So you can flash it in and exile a creature an opponent controls. Until it leaves the battlefield. We're running Read the Bones just as our card draw engines. And then Bloodcurse Knight is our only creature in the entire deck. It's going to be a 4/3 every game, 4/3 with lifelink, and it's going to help you gain back that lifelink, eat a removal spell, probably make your opponent keep in all the removal spells, and it's just going to be a really, it's a 4/3 for 3 mana, which with this deck, you're pretty much guaranteed for that to happen. With lifelink, that's a significant card in the metagame at the moment, and especially if you hook it up with the Helm of the Gods, it's going to be a incredibly powerful life-linking card. So we have 2 Suppression Bonds, which can also get rid of Planeswalker's ability to activate. This is kind of our panic button versus Gideon and Jace. And it's not bad at 4 mana. That's about the same cost as like an Utter End, which we do have in the sideboard. But it's any permanent. It doesn't exile the permanent. It just gets rid of their activations. Triggered abilities still happen. If it goes on a creature, it can't attack or block. But, I mean, there's a lot of cards in the format right now that have activated abilities that you can get rid of. It's just another card that gets rid of a creature. I think that we're going to try it out to see if it works. If it doesn't work, we might end up cutting it. But one cool thing about Suppression Bonds is it actually does have a decent casting cost. So with Starfield of Nyx, it becomes a 4/4. Starfield of Nyx, I don't know how I quite think about this. I thought about putting one more in the sideboard. The problem with Starfield of Nyx is if you cast it for 5, your opponent can use like a board wipe and like destroy all creatures, and then all of your Stasis Snare, Silkwrap, Suspension Fields, they die and they get back all of those cards. So Starfield is kind of awkward. I think it's great versus control, but basically be advised this card can lose you the game if you play it out of sequence. Like if it hits a board state where you really don't need to turn your creatures in for lethal. You want to play this, drop down Starfield of Nyx, and then swing in with all of your guys. You'll have the 2/2 Silkwraps, 2/2 Suspension Fields, 3/3 Stasis Snares, and then 4/4 Suppression Bonds, and 5/5 Sigil of Empty Thrones. Speaking of which, Sigil of Empty Throne is going to be our win condition. It's going to, subsequential enchantments that we cast are going to put out a 4/4 Angel token. We have tons of enchantments in this deck. Let's see here. Let's just count them up. We have 4, 8, 12, 16, 18, 20, 24, 25, 26 enchantments. So the base, basically our entire deck is enchantment based. We have 2 more Quarantine Fields. I thought about putting more of these because it is something that if you have 6 mana and getting rid of 2 targets. I think in my non-budget version I got a Tasigur and a Gideon with a Quarantine Field against Jeskai Black, and that was just a blowout. So on to our sideboard, we have 2 Surge of Righteousness. This is versus basically a Tarka red, and there's a few other red decks or black decks it's worth putting in. It just helps you against the early aggro. You do only have Silkwraps at the first before the Stasis Snares come into play, so adding a way to destroy those early creatures is necessary. So there's 2 Surge of Righteousnesses in the sideboard. We're going to try one of Citadel Siege. This is just kind of a experiment. What's cool about this one is it really works a lot better with Hangerback Walker, as you can put 2 counters on it at the beginning of your combat, and then Hangerback Walker gets value immediately. It's okay with like activating Myth Realized and then throwing 2 more counters on it, or Bloodcurse Knight, putting 2 counters. But where this really shines is it's another way to lock down your opponent's attack phase with you name dragons at the beginning of combat on each of your opponent's turn, tap target creature, and it's very proactive. Like the problem with this deck against cards like Mantis Rider is Mantis Rider usually always gets in for 3 damage before you can deal with it with a Silkwrap or a Stasis. Well, Stasis Snare works, but Silkwrap or a Suspension Field. But Citadel Siege is just added protection against that deck. Oh, we do have another Starfield. I did add the 3rd one in the sideboard. Planar Outburst in this deck is basically a panic button. It's something I think we'll bring it in versus maybe Green-White Megamorph. If they just get out of hand, you can Planar Outburst. We have a 1 Duress and a 3 Transgress the Mind. I'm using Transgress the Mind because it combos very well with our next card in the sideboard, which is Wasteland Strangler. Transgress the Mind says target player reveals their hand. You choose a card with converted mana cost 3 or less, or 3 or greater, and exile that card. Transgress is going to be great against the Tragic Arrogance. Tragic Arrogance is the best card against us, or Ugin. We need to get rid of both those cards. They're very problematic. Gideon is also a pain for us to deal with, so transgressing Gideon or Tragic Arrogance or Wingmate Rock, or there's a few cards that just, the ones that have like a 2-for-1 effect, Planeswalkers, board wipes, those cards are very, very good to get out. A 1 of Duress, I'm going to really bring it in as just a 1 of, because the Transgress just seems a lot better with the combo with Wasteland Strangler. Wasteland Strangler says when it enters the battlefield, it may put a card from opponent owns from exile into that player's graveyard. If you do, a creature gets -3, -3. What's so great about Wasteland Strangler is it actually combos with like Stasis Snare. All of your enchantments to exile, you can actually return those back from that exile zone into their graveyard, which is so cool against like Dramoka's command decks, because you can Wasteland Strangler and just get rid of what's under a Silkwrap, and then if they command, then you're not going to give them back a very relevant creature. So it also works with Utter End. So we have a lot of this exile. Strangler might end up going up to a 4 of. We'll have to test it out to see. There's a few other cards I thought about putting in this deck, and we might end up putting them in the deck if we decide we need more of a token generator. We have Retreat to Emeria, which is, here, I'll pull them up. Retreat. There's Retreat to Emeria, which says it's landfall whenever a land enters the battlefield. You can put a 1/1 white ally creature token on the battlefield, or creatures you control get +1/+1 until end turn. Usually you're going to be using that for the 1/1 white core ally. This is another card that I thought about putting on. This is a 1 of or 2 of in the non-budget version, because it's very good with like Hangerback Walker tokens if you have a bunch on the battlefield, or Thopter tokens on the battlefield, or even the From Beyond Eldrazi spawns. The Retreat can be lethal with just playing a fetch land. You give everything +2/+2 and then swing in. But in this deck, we are running 0 fetch lands, so I don't think the Retreat quite deserves a spot in this deck. We might want it because it generates us those ally creature tokens, but at 4, we've usually used up most of our lands. We curve out at 5. It does give us value after every other land after that, but I just don't quite see us running it in here to get enough value out of it. And the same is true for the Retreat to Hagra. This one says whenever land enters the battlefield, you can either give a creature +1 with your own death touch, or they lose a life and you gain a life, which is nice versus like a hyper-aggressive deck or a way to tax up your opponent. I just didn't feel like it quite deserved a slot in the deck, but it's definitely something you could put in. And the other one is Palace Siege. Palace Siege just didn't really have a good cons implication here, because Con says at the beginning of your upkeep, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. I thought about using the Lotus Eye, I think is what it's called, that can return an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand when you play it for, I believe, 4 mana. Yeah, that'd be, we'll look at it in a second, but that'd be the best combo with Palace Siege, is if you had that card and then you can basically just keep getting back enchantments that have gone to the graveyard, or when that dies, you get a creature back, and then it can be very, very hard for controller mid-range to overcome that combo. But Palace Siege is 5 mana. It's just a little bit hard to get to work in this deck. Again, at 5 mana, you want to be winning the game with either your Sigil of the Empty Throne or your Starfield of Nyx, and it just didn't quite seem to have a place in the deck. And then the other mode on the Palace Siege was what I did want, which is lose 2 life and gain 2 life at the beginning of your upkeep. But that just doesn't, again, seem like enough to get you where you need to be against certain decks. You do control the board out, and this could tax your opponent to death. We might try a Palace Siege. For the moment, I do not have one in the sideboard or the main board. So let's look up the combo with the Lotus, or the Palace Siege, which is the Lotus Eye Mystics is what it's called. So this is prowess, and when Lotus Eye Mystic enters the battlefield, return target enchantment card from your graveyard or hand. It has a great synergy with everything in your deck, because everything is basically going to be enchantments. So one of the cards we are testing out a lot is Myth Realize. Is a 4 of in here. It's just your 1-drop, and then it is going to get a lot of counters because the vast majority of your deck, all but 4 cards and lands, are so 28 cards in your deck. So the whopping majority of your deck is going to put a counter on Myth Realized, and then it doesn't. It's something that creature removal can't hit right off the bat. You're going to start activating it later on when it's like a 5/5. Equipping it to the Helm of the Gods could easily be a win condition. So that's why we're trying Mithrilize. I thought about like Monastery Mentor or Seeker of the Way as another way, but what makes this deck so good is it has very few cards that are susceptible to creature removal. You have the Blood Curse Knight that will dodge a Wild Slash and a Kolaghan's Command, but will die to most of the other removal in the format. Anyway, we'll try this deck, see how well it works, and again, we'll be looking forward to the Sunday series. We'll be playing the non-budget version. I also thought, one quick thing, I also thought about, if you don't like black, red is wide open too. I really like red because you get 2 enchantments that I think are pretty neat, because you can see that we're barely just splashing black. Read the Bones is our card draw engine. But if you go into red, you have Outpost Siege, which I think is just what the deck wants for the longevity, because you're playing control route, and this will give you a card per turn. Outpost Siege, and then we also have the Molten, the discard a land card, Molten Vortex, which can also play the, and we might do this for next week's Plan on a Budget. We'll see how well we like this, but the Molten Vortex can discard all your excess lands, do 2 damage to our creature player, so this can actually act as your win condition. So we might try that. We'll see. We'll play this out. This has been Kevin with GatheringMagic.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Playing on a Budget. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Gathering Magic and check out our Playing on a Budget playlist, which contains every episode. Thanks again, and hope to see you soon.